Welcome everyone to another podcast. We have a special guest today, Howard J. Davis, HAUI. He's an award-winning mixed media artist who defies categorization. Over the past decade, he has created a diverse body of work that spans theater, dance, opera, film, and visual arts. His art explores themes of race, gender, and sexual orientation, bridging the gap between art and activism. Howie, I guess they call him, HAUI, has collaborated with leading arts organizations such as the Canadian Opera Company, which is my favorite, CBC, APTN, the Stratford Festival, and the Shaw Festival. He is also part of the Young Vic Creators Program in the UK. HAUI Howie's work includes directing both stage and screen, designing video projections and visual arts, devising, playwriting, poetry, producing, and performing. Notable projects include his feature film debut Mixed Up, which we'll talk about, trans filmmaker Jack Fox, and the site-specific dance installation Private Flowers at Toronto's Port York. And in 2024, he directed the world premiere of Portia, Chryptych, Black Opera for Portia White, which is interesting. Canadian Opera Company marking a groundbreaking milestone in opera with an all-black creative team. Awesome diversity right there. Howie's art amplifies overlooked themes, myths, and history, creating works that intersect various artistic mediums and challenge tradition media boundaries through an unconventional, diverse lens. Thank you, Howie. Howard, thank you very much for being here.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. What inspired you to become a mixed media artist?
Well, it's interesting. It's something I feel like I arrived at. I think there's been these themes that have emerged over the last decade in my practice, and it was an interesting process. When you start creating your work, you're just creating. You don't see the sort of the themes that emerge, but after a decade, it sort of has become very apparent that how I am as a being, the sort of intersections of all my DNA, it's manifested in the work that I do. And it's allowed me to really focus on the narrative, and then the form emerges from that. So that's why certain projects like Private Flowers, which was, so much about male and male intimacy, emerged as a dance piece. So I'm following the story, and the form emerges.
Um, that's interesting. How do you approach blending different artistic disciplines in your work?
Well, similarly to my last question, how does it form? I think it's an organic process. Some of the projects I've worked on, from seed to dissemination, they take about 5 to 6 years. And um, I think it's a testament to, you can't force process, you have to let it be. And I will quote my beautiful partner, Peter Hinton, who has said numerous times to me, and it's starting to make sense in my own practice, that interpretation is something you arrive at. And I truly believe that's it's a very real thing, that you don't the light bulb doesn't happen right away. You are always excavating and mining, and it's something that you arrive at. And I think I'm just interested in blending mediums, because things don't exist as one thing ever. They that I think it's interesting, the paradox and the contradictions that happen, that can exist in work, like the piece I did last year at the Shaw Festival. And I that's the last piece I worked on with my husband. It was Edith Wharton's long lost play that she never finished, called Shadow of a Doubt. And that piece, Peter and I were looking at how surveillance, how video, how we are, how people are watched in a Victorian period, and utilizing video and period drama as, what two things that might contradict, how they might exist together in one space. and that fascinates me.
Can you tell us about your experience directing Mixed Up?
Yeah. Tell me, the kangaroo man? Place is hang on.
They say before you're born, you're only a twinkle in your father's eye. Are we all just mixed up? Being mixed is complex, but can also feel free. I'm the quintessential influential version of me. This search is ongoing and can so often feel like a growing definition of what's really real. But instead of being a futile exploration, it's my mixed up manifesto and my proud declaration. Explaining my heritage to people is like coming out of the closet every time. Does that make me mixed up? I damn well hope so. Sure, yeah. Mixed Up was a huge project that I was very fortunate to have in a very precarious time. I think, 2020, we all know what happened, but a lot of people lost work, and I was fortunate that the right before the pandemic happened, I was in the UK on a bit of a holiday slash business trip. And it was there that I actually took some video equipment with me, and I was chronicling, our holiday essentially, but was really um, exploring these ideas of what it means to exist as someone that occupies multiple spaces in my in my heritage, in my gender. And what manifested from that was a piece, this film Mixed Up, that was eventually produced by my dear friend Jack Fox, based out of Vancouver, and LTV, which is a I think they're the largest um, LGBTQ network in the world, and they produce original material, and they came on board. They were excited about me exploring the nuances of what it means to be mixed in one's being, and it's something that, living the experience is one thing, but sharing it with audiences is another, because it unearths a lot of questions around identity that most people don't have to think about ever. And for me, it was very healing and very therapeutic to get these ideas out for audiences to react to. And I can't I don't think I can wrap it up in a neat little answer, because it was very complex, a process to create a feature-length film in isolation. But the reactions that I've received from that piece have been pretty amazing, actually, and from all around the world, from South America to Europe. People have reached out online and shared how much the story resonated with them. And that means a lot to me, to any artist, to have their work be seen.
Did you have any issues with getting work because of your sexual orientation, or is it just because it's hard to get into the directing field?
It's a good question, actually. I think I've been I've come into the industry, or I came into the industry at a time where there was some trepidation from people, and you know queerness is not something that is visible as much as one's heritage is. So I it's hard for me to say I didn't get things because of my queerness. Maybe that is the case, but no one would be as bold as to say that, for fear of um backlash. Like, that would be really bad for someone to not hire someone because of that. So I it's a hard question for me to answer, because I don't know. I feel like my existence has only birthed, fruitful experiences, and anyone that wouldn't want to hire me because of that, why would I want to work with them? Like, I would have no desire to work with people that aren't interested in that part of me, because it's like, queerness is so much more than who we are with. It's I love my queerness. I love queer culture, and it's so interesting how much a heteronormative society borrows, steals from queer culture. And a great example is RuPaul's Drag Race. Something that was very fringe and very of the peripheries is now totally mainstream. And it's a heteronormative society that goes, oh, that's interesting, that's unusual, let's make it and profit off of it. That's like the history of blackness too. People have done that with black culture for I don't even know how long. So it's an interesting question that deserves excavating.
So does trans filmmaker Jack Fox make known that, hey, I used to be a woman? Or does he like, was he actually, when he was a female, I guess, was, was she a filmmaker when he was a woman, or did he just become a filmmaker after he transitioned? Is that
Oh,
a fair
that's it.
question?
I believe Jack had always been part of the arts community, but the bulk of their work was after transitioning, and that's when I met Jack, was through um, mutual colleagues. They came to Niagara on the Lake, and I was part of a documentary that Jack produced um, about queer love across generations. And in that process, we got to talking, and there were so many mutual and exciting themes that we were interested in exploring. So um, that sort of birthed this idea of, let's work together. And it was Jack that actually had the connection to Out TV. And there were certain things in the documentary world that I hadn't had little experience of, but Jack was so fruitful in that process to helping me navigate terrain that I was unfamiliar with. And I think a big part of documentary that I was surprised about was the idea of the narrative, or the narrator being a unreliable source. I think a lot of people look at documentary and go, "Oh, it's truth." They're always seeking truth, but it was very subversive when we were like, "Oh, actually, is the central figure in any documentary, are they a liar?" It was an interesting provocation for us to explore in a form that one might assume is always seeking truth.
So the site-specific dance installation of private flowers, um, what challenges did you face while creating that?
Oh, that's a good question. I think so Private Flowers, I guess for those who are listening that may not have a context, that was a piece that was commissioned by the city of Toronto as part of the city's, desire to address anti-racism, anti-colonialism, anti-queer rhetoric that, was is continues to be an issue, but the city wanted to address it in these site-specific projects. Private Flowers, this piece that I devised, was part of that initiative. And in the process, I think one of the biggest hurdles um, in trying to do work in historical sites, a simple issue is power. It's hard to find, when you're doing work that requires technology, like simple electrical power. It's hard to come by when you're trying to, charge a battery to film something, when you're in these sites. I think, that's one way of answering that question. But another difficulty, is just the lack of knowledge around these histories. You have to probe and look in areas that others haven't, and that means spending days on end in archives in universities or in other institutions just to find a seed of information. And that was both a challenge, but also a really rewarding process to learn about those before me who have explored similar terrain, but didn't have the technical advancements to take it that step further. And so that's what was exciting for me, was to I learned in the process that a group of artists in the 90s were exploring that same history. And it was a group of amazing artists now who are leaders in the theater and film industry. And one of them was my partner, actually. They did a piece with Canadian Stage. And it was amazing for me to go, oh, wow, I get to take what they did, but put my spin on it.
What challenge? How do themes of race, gender, and sexual orientation influence your art? For instance, like Portia Chryptych, which you directed. Um, how did that? How do you incorporate that in there?
Well, it's a great question. I think it's funny. I actually had another interview this morning, and it was a similar question. So I'm going to try and find a different way of answering it. I think the themes that I have explored, I'm not always. Those are. How do I say this? I feel like I've got a delicate way in my practice of not being didactic in the themes that I explore. I think they are the result of my desire to really explore art and visuals and composition, and those are a byproduct of it. And I think that it happens because they're so integral to who I am as a person, that those are the themes that emerge. But it's I wouldn't say I go I'm always leading with theory, because that makes for boring art, in my opinion. I like to explore visuals is really my entry in. And you know one could say that it's hard for me to answer this question sometimes, because I like to leave theory to critics and people that consume my work. But for the most part, I think I'm just very interested in visuals, which are lacking a little bit in theater right now, and for many reasons that I could go on for days about. But I think there's a bit of a lack of image-based work right now, and I want to hold on to that for dear life, because visuals, like you can see behind me, like it's a huge part of my practice.
How about someone like Henry Moore or Michelangelo? So Michelangelo's David and Henry Moore's sculptures. How would he incorporate race, gender, and sexual orientation in that art?
Hmm. Again, this is a great question for like art theorists. I wish I could be a bit more articulate about this, but I think, someone like Michelangelo, and it's an amazing observation I've seen in some of his work, like even the female form in those beautiful, like Primavera and all of these beautiful pieces we've seen. Um, Sorry, Primavera, that is not Michelangelo. That's Botticelli. My references are all over the place today. But I say it, I guess, because I've noticed this in certain artistic works of a time, that the female form is very ambiguous. There are certain traits that are very masculine and very feminine, and that's what is exciting to me in those pieces, is they endow the viewer to see themselves, to see the society of which they are in the works. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's an interesting art is such a window into seeing into another world, and I think that's something that I want to continue doing with work. I think we often see any form of medium, whether it's dance or theater, and we want to um, always see it through our contemporary lens. And I think part of the excitement is stepping outside of our experience to go to a certain time. It's more, it takes you out of yourself in a different way. And I know I haven't answered your question, but um, again, I don't know if I answered your question at all.
That's okay. You don't have to be an art theory for that question, but I kind of like to dive deep. I'm an artist myself, and I love art, and I like looking at, for instance, Van Gogh's um, the sunflower one. What's that called? Shoot, I knew that one. Starry, Starry Night. I like that one as well. And I'm
Hmm.
trying to think what was going through his head when he painted that. So last year, I'm going to say last year, it seems like it's this year, but last year you directed the world premiere of Portia Chryptych, a black opera for Portia White. Can you exactly tell me what exactly is a black opera?
Well, that was a huge question we had from the get-go. I think part of my interest, even in the title of calling it a black opera, was decentralizing an art form that is innately white. You know, people think of opera, and it is a high C culture that um, has excluded our voices and our stories. So part of my desire was to create a piece that centralized blackness first and foremost. And I think, you know, deep, way back in history, you'd go to black church and you would hear people singing Puccini and spirituals, and there was an interesting connection between, musical scripture and what that meant for a work that explores music but also spirituality in a very um, robust form that opera can be, that explores spirituality and art and visuals and music and all of the elements of theater that I love. And so it was a beautiful way for us to redefine a form that has historically excluded certain people.
What was it like working with Canadian art company?
Oh my gosh, I've got to say, like, it was so it was so amazing to see how they embraced every idea that was presented. Like, I realized, when they opened the door to me, I don't think they realized who I would be inviting into the process, and it was people that had never worked in that space before. But a beautiful moment that I will always remember is being in those rehearsal halls, and we were in one of the studios called the Vinci Studios, and Ernesto Vinci was actually Portia's teacher. And so it was amazing being in this venue, in this space that had Portia in the fibers of the walls and the rooms, even though she never in her lifetime was able to perform on those stages. So it was I guess, a beautiful sort of paradox that we were standing in this in history always, but always in the present. And that's what that piece was so it's why it's sometimes hard to talk about it, because it was so life-changing for me as being my first time in the director's seat on such a full-length piece, that I think I'm going to hold that experience very close to my heart, because it was lovely to see an institution embrace change. And I also recognize that certain institutions can't move as quickly as we might want them to, because they are so used to going in one direction. And so I sort of likened it sometimes to being on a big cruise liner, and I'm the speedboat. Like, I can shift and move fast, but a ship has to really, it has to turn slower. And I I know it's an awful analogy to use because, you know, some people might go, the Titanic, why are you making that connection? And that's not what I was trying to say at all. But I think it's an interesting way of observing change, that it has to happen on myopic levels for it to change and be a lasting change. If you try and shift too quickly, things can capsize.
That's been very interesting, the feeling and your mindset when you direct it. Like you're putting all control on the medium. Like, did you like do the breathing exercises? I can be calm. What was going through
Yeah,
your head? What's the mindset?
it was a that's a really good question because it's something I'm still navigating post process, is how to maintain a practice when, you know, I've been, these opportunities have come and they're very big opportunities, how to work through them and find sustainability in that so I'm not getting so overwhelmed. And I think that that just comes with practice. Like I have to just continue my process, which I'm still learning, honestly. And I think I'll always continue to be learning because there were some times I was very stressed, and you can't show that when you're trying to lead. Um, but I also learned in the process you can show that when you're trying to lead. And if you are open and share with people that you're overwhelmed, people collectively can, you know, have a sigh of relief together.
What does that mean, like, to amplify overlooked themes, myths, and histories? What amplify?
Well, you know, amplification can be different to many people, but I think for me, it's about ensuring that those who have historically been overlooked have the megaphone to go, I'm over here. And that for me is, I guess, the simplest way of saying that, you know, my the stories I've been gifted to share deserve um, the spotlight to be able to have their voices shared. And that was the beautiful thing for me of moving away from being the performer to being, you know, having the art exist outside of me, is I'm able to amplify stories in a different way as opposed to being the vehicle or the vessel. It gets to exist outside of me, which I sort of love more now.
It's too bad that people of different sexual orientation, blacks, Asian, they have to struggle so much just to be known and made. It's like in this day and age, I mean, come on, get rid of racism. We're all the same. It's all the same, right? What do you think of that?
Right. What do I think of that? Well, it's how do I say this? It's a beautiful way of, I hear the beauty in what you're saying, but it's also not as simple as that, because people are, I think people are fighting now that their differences be seen because they haven't been seen for so long. So I'm not one to argue that we're all the same, because we're fundamentally all different. And that's what I think we're asking people to see, is our differences. And you know, I've dealt with it for so many years, of the person the person who says, oh, I don't see color, we're all the same. And I go, well, you need to see difference, because that's what we're asking for, is that our differences are celebrated and not sort of um, assimilated as one thing.
So, how do you choose the themes and stories you want to explore in your project?
I think they manifest in different ways, you know, like themes emerge almost immediately for me sometimes, and then others come later when I'm sort of in the mire of my creative bubble. And who knows, that maybe in the future my I'll pivot to wanting to explore different things, but at the moment, that I think it's important to use a platform, you can call it that, to shed light on histories and certain parts of society that have not been heard. That's more interesting to me, is taking, you know, the lens, so to speak, and just shifting it slightly to see those um, whose stories have not had the limelight. And I know it's an awful example, but I'll use it as a as a framing device. I think it was last year I saw the movie Oppenheimer, and you know, I sat in the theater, and when I saw Barbie too, but Oppenheimer, I sort of kept questioning why do I need to see this perspective of, you know, the man who created the atomic bomb or whatever he did, when there were people like Marie Clements, an incredible Dene filmmaker and playwright. Marie wrote a piece called um, Burning Vision, and in that piece it was about, you know, the uranium that was mined to create the bombs from indigenous land. And for me, I was like, I'm way more interested in seeing that lens than Oppenheimer. And so that's what I mean by, like, how do we shift the narrative in a way that is not shifting for the sake of just being subversive, but to actually give voice to those who haven't had the platform. Does that make sense?
I understand that. Yes, it's so like you're watching Oppenheimer, and you're like, oh, I love this movie. But if you do a study up on Oppenheimer and what it all was all about, you can begin to feel more emotional about it.
Right.
Um, when you do all these films, like role does activism act, what role does activism play?
Oh, that's a good question that I it's funny, in the process of doing, I don't think about it, just is so second nature. But forgive me if I'm sort of searching for the answer a little bit. I think activism for me is, you know, directly connected to this idea of how we shift the lens. And so I am repeating myself a little bit. If it's just another way um of deconstructing stories that have had dominance and shifting that to um it's not about helping, I guess. Well, it is about helping, but it's just shifting the narrative a little bit for me. And the lines between art and activism now are so blended in the work that I do that it's hard to theorize it. It's just so innately part of my practice.
Do you have like a creative process when starting a new project? For instance, what was the creative process for Private Flowers?
It's funny, yeah. I think the creative process for me, it's never the same, which is you know, hard in some ways, because you think that there might be some sort of formula. There isn't. They manifest in the different ways they manifest. But I'm very fortunate this year. I have a chance to I just got a Chalmers grant through the Ontario Arts Council, which is a grant to work on process and development. So I'm not actually having to focus on a product. Right now, it's truly about returning to my process. So it's interesting that you're asking this question, because I get to now really focus on what that process is for me at this sort of juncture in my artistic journey.
That's very interesting. You got all this going on. How do you deal with your mental health? How do you balance your work across theater, dance, opera, film, visual arts? Like you got to deal with your mental health at some points as well.
Yeah, do you know what though? Like, it's for me, it is so healthy. Like, it's so therapeutic doing what I do that it sort of is the balm, you could call it, to um, the chaos of the world. It's art that it is actually healing for me. So I don't see it as chaotic. It feels very healing. Anything I'm doing, whether I'm, the next piece I'm developing, I'll be in New York this May working on a new piece. I can't say where, unfortunately, yet because it's not announced yet. But so I'm working on a piece down there that blends jazz from the Harlem Renaissance. It's like set in the 1920s, and it explores jazz music and um, mixed love. So it's a love relationship between a black African American and a white British woman. So that piece is so amazing to be inside of and stewing over. And I'm writing music for that right now. And then again, doing this piece through the Chalmers grant, which is allowing me to go to Cuba and Jamaica. I'll be there this year. So again, I'm not saying this to say, I look what all of these things I'm doing, but to sort of emphasize the fact that it's very, it is my therapy. I don't see it as a um I I'm not sure what you were trying to suggest with the question, but it's I find it exciting to be doing all these different things because it fuels me in a way that I don't think anything else does in my life.
Interesting. What's your motivation to being an award-winning mixed media artist? Like, where do you see yourself? What do you want to be ultimately doing?
Hmm. Oh, the big 10-year question. I think the privilege of just being able to do what I do um, is one of the biggest motivations. Like I like that I get to that my hobby is my work, and I think my hope is that I'm just able to continue expanding my reach so I can make some change and allow people to think differently than they did before they've seen the pieces that I do. I think that that's the beauty of any art is it can change people's biases, it can change their minds, and any sort of preconceived notion is shifted. And that is my hope, is that people can leave seeing something I've done and go, oh, I'm seeing it in a new way.
What do you see? What's your most rewarding project to date?
Oh, that's a oh, God, all these questions so good. Um, my most rewarding process. Oh my gosh. This is such a good question. Well, I think the obvious answer is the working with the COC. That was completely, you know, on a myopic level and on a huge level. It changed me. But there's something beautiful about working on very intimate projects, and the piece I just did this past fall. I worked with a mentor of mine, um, Audrey Zena Mandela, who, if you don't know who Audrey is, she's incredible, and you should know who she is. Audrey created Be Current Performing Arts, and Be Current, is one of the oldest Black theater companies in Canada. And Audrey, I met several years ago, and it was so wonderful working with her on a piece about aging and mentorship and music. So that piece is it's sort of like a surrealist spoken word film that we shot in Stratford actually this past summer, and it's going to be releasing more widely this year. But that was so healing. Like the intimacy of just being with me and her was extremely rewarding. And I think part of it is because she doesn't treat me like a junior in any way. Like the first time I met her, we were complete. It felt like I'd met my colleague, and she's, in her 70s, and I'm in my 30s, but it's so amazing to see the way that our collaboration has evolved. So that's pretty up there for special projects.
That's amazing, Howard. Like, how do you stay inspired and motivated in your work? Like, isn't there a time when you just like that? That's it. I'm done. I'm walking away.
Uh, oh, I have those moments for sure. Like sometimes I'm like, I'm tired, and Christmas was a bit like that for me. Like there was a day where I was like, you know what, I'm done. Like I'm done with this year. Let me just hibernate. And I think I'm excited, to go to Greece. I think I told you before we started recording. I'm leaving. Um, I leave next week, so I'm glad we were able to get this conversation in before I go away, and to go to Greece, the birthplace of the alphabet and currency and theater. Like I'm so excited to be inspired by stuff around me and not be in process mode of having to write something. Like I get to just be in a different culture than my own.
That's amazing, Howard. So, how do you like? Okay, so you're doing all the directing, the films, and everything. How do you incorporate? How are you incorporating the technology into your artistic practice? How does that work for you?
It's a great question. I think, sorry, I'm a bit bunged up because I'm still getting over a cold. Embracing technology, I think, um, it's funny. I've got a bit of a limit in my technology because AI is, I just have no, I have an extreme adversity to it. I don't want to go anywhere near it. But I think it's my first, one of my first hobbies was photography. I've loved it since I was so young. But I stepped away from it when I went to study theater, and I kept it as a hobby. And ironically, since graduating, since coming into the industry, it's been a huge motivation for me using the camera. So I think it's something I'll always continue to embrace, and um I like the juxtaposition of history and technology. There's something interesting in that to me that I'll probably keep exploring as long as I'm creating.
I don't know, Howard. I know that AI is going to eventually be part of the mixed process. Like, it's going to one day where filmmakers are going to be creating full-fledged 2-hour blockbuster movies just using like in-video AI and all that stuff. So you can't
Hmm.
avoid it. Is there any way that if you were forced to incorporate AI, is there any fact of the AI process that you would want to
Hmm.
use and the others that you would throw away?
Yeah, it's just so funny. Like I feel like AI is a tool that I want to use to do my taxes, not really to create with. So maybe I'll change, maybe, but right now I don't see it being a part of my work because it's I want to be the um I want to have the agency over what I create, not a something that has no consciousness. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question the way you want it to be answered, but it's not something I see myself using.
I can imagine you doing all this of what you're doing now, 20, 30 years from now, and you've got like the AI police who are coming knocking on your door and say, is this a house without AI? You need AI. If you don't use AI, you're arrested, stuff like that. But no. I'd like to ask you, so what are some of the key messages you hope to convey through your
Hmm. Uh, the key messages. That's a great question. I know some might call this like, what is the premise of your work? I also, this is a boring answer, but I don't work that way in the pieces that I do. I think um, I hope people take away a multitude of meanings in my pieces, and I think part of that is healing, collective healing is something I really believe is necessary. And it was a beautiful moment. I was talking to Tracy Melshore, who I love. Tracy is one of the judges on Canada's Drag Race. Um, I don't know if you watch that show, but Tracy is part of eTalk Canada, and I had an interview with her about Mixed Up. It was several years ago, and she said to me in that process, "Oh, Mixed Up is going to allow a lot of people to begin healing." And I went, "Wow, like that's so from her mouth to the world's lips. Like maybe that is hopefully what my premise or my key message is that people can um, look to art to be a healing tool because it's so true."
Have you ever had like creative blocks or challenges, and how did you get through them?
Oh, always. Yeah, yeah. The blocks are, I think, necessary, but um, it comes with the territory. But you just work through them. You go to other things. Like I love cooking, and I love my partner. I love my dogs. I love my family. So anytime I have a block, I just go, this is part of the process, and you just have to work through it.
What has been the most surprising reaction to your work?
Oh, oh gosh. Oh my gosh, you got me stumped. I'm trying to go back in my in my encyclopedia. I think whew, well, you stumped me, Chris, you stumped me. I think some of the reactions to Mixed Up were pretty profound for me, you know, and because the benefit of having, a film go to festivals, the reach is so huge. So I remember having someone reach out to me from Sweden because the film did some of it, it traveled quite widely, and just knowing that um, my experience in the film, what I go through, and if you watch the movie, um, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But it was someone overseas that said how much they saw myself or they saw themselves in my story. And I went, oh, wow, that's amazing how when you're so specific, you can speak to a universal language around just one sense of belonging. That was pretty eye-opening to me because I'd always thought, oh, to be universal, one must strive to be universal, which is so not the case. If you're very specific, you can touch the most unexpected people.
I was thinking about the experience you had with Young Vic Creators Program. What were the ages?
Well, that the Young Vic Creators Program is a beautiful initiative that was I can't remember how many years ago it was started, but it's part of I'm very fortunate that I'm part of that program because I don't currently live in the UK. I was born there, but part of their initiative was to connect people across the UK, across theatrical disciplines. So I joined that essentially as a database, but in that process I've met a lot of people from where I was from in the Southwest to Plymouth to Birmingham, and I think I'm excited to see Nadia take over the AD-ship. Nadia Fall is the new AD that's taking over, and it was very amazing when I was back there. I think it was 2021 or 22. My composer on the opera, he did a new musical about Nelson Mandela at the Young Vic. And so I went over and we did some work on my opera when he was not in rehearsals. And the community there is so, they're just so welcoming and inviting. And it's a true testament to why I think the UK are leaders in theater. And I'm not saying theater here isn't good, but I think there's a tendency for us to react to Europe and the States, and I think that's something that I always remember for myself is how do we lead and not be passive and reactionary. It's a mindset thing that I just noticed when I was over there and meeting certain people.
But now I want to get back into theater. I actually want to try to learn these like um, Beetlejuice, Wicked. I want to get into those big performances, and I want to do a lot of opera because I sing Italian opera and German and French.
Hmm. Wow,
Um,
it's amazing.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Language is so vital for opera.
definitely. I
Sometimes I'm
know,
like, I don't feel smart enough.
I know. Um, how do you engage with the audience and community like through your art?
Oh, that's a good question. Because um, sometimes I feel like I don't do it enough. Like I do love creating theater, but sometimes going is difficult for me. Because to be honest, you'll go see theater and it's a lot of other theater people in the audience. So that's my that's where I sort of have difficulty in engaging with the audience because I go, who is the audience? I'm not sure if there is one, um, which I wish and hope can change. But it was interesting this last fall. I was part of um, this initiative through TIFF. And so I went to TIFF and, did this. It was so hectic and busy. It was amazing, but it was a bit overwhelming seeing that many films. And I saw how film does actually have an audience. It truly does. And so I think part of that is just engaging with um, having the inquiry to connect with people between movies. And I met so many random people and had beautiful conversations with perfect strangers about film. So I think that's something that perhaps is lacking a little bit in theater is the conversations after the intermission conversations. It's people are going to see theater and being hypercritical and not actually engaging with the material. And I think that's important that we just are kind and engage with a different mindset than going to be immediately, judgmental.
Oh, I went to the Toronto International Film Festival, but over the summer of 2023, my sister who lives in LA and her husband were here, and my brother, and then all six of us went to the TIFF. It's so enjoyable. You get to stand in front of that wall, and you get to take a picture of yourself as you're a star, and it says like TIFF on it. It's really beautiful, and then you get to see movies that won't be out for another year. My brother does a year, but when I had a chance to go in summer, it was fantastic.
Yeah,
I,
it was. I really
I
enjoyed it too.
Yeah. Um, well, this isn't my last question, but my last question is going to be a clincher for you. I, I can't wait to see how you handle it. But who would you like to collaborate with?
Oh my gosh. Uh, I'm gonna put this out into the universe. I do really, really want to work with Stan Douglas. Stan Douglas is an incredible multidisciplinary artist. He just actually was made Order of Canada, which I'm really excited about. So Stan is one of them. Um, oh, Kara Walker. She's amazing. Kara Walker is an American multidisciplinary artist too. Um, I think right now I'm interested in working with people who work internationally to see how they navigate, you know, themes across a wider scope. So those two are pretty up there on my list.
What advice would you give to aspiring multidisciplinary artists?
Oh, and a great question. And I think the the simplest way of answering this is to go through the door of least resistance, because and we all know it too well as many artists, that you can feel like you're sort of you can feel like that Sisyphus pushing that boulder up that hill, and when you find the door of least resistance, it can just manifest beautiful moments. So that's like I guess the simplest answer to that question. Because it's not easy. It is not easy doing what I do. It's not for the faint of heart. But I don't say that to scare people away, but just to be really mindful about why you're pursuing what you're doing. Because if you're doing it for like fame and stuff, like good luck. That never works. So yeah, go through the door of least resistance.
Right. You ready for the clincher? Let's see how you do
Sure.
this one.
Let's see how we do.
All right, Howard. Do you define success as an artist?
How do I define success?
No. Do you define success as an artist?
Do I define success? Um, oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think the artist can, but it's defined by their own metric of what that means. Like I can know that a project that I've done is successful because it's had an impact on others. So yes, in short.
Yeah, thank you so much, Howard. I really appreciate
Oh,
you
thank
joining us
you.
today. No, thank you for sharing your insights, and hope your work inspires and challenges more, and that we get to see the world through a more inclusive and diverse lens.
Oh, me
So,
too.
really appreciate that.
That's the goal, right? Thanks for
Okay,
having
point.
me. It's lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, lovely talking to you. Thank you so much, Howard. And
Mhm.
everyone, everything will be linked down below, and hopefully we can get. I don't know if there's links to their two movies there. Be very
Mhm.
interested in letting people see the private flowers and the mixed stuff. Um, and a Portia Chryptych, I think. We'll have to get some information on that. That's an opera, and I'm really into opera, and I think people would be interested in that. So, okay, Howard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Very well. And I wish for you great success, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Aw,
Have a good time in Greece.
thanks.
So
See ya.
wait right there.